Now, throughout my 24-year career, I know I don't look old enough. Every business I have worked with or for has outsourced an element of their IT service. Be that to bespoke boutique providers for niche services, all the way up to a full outsource of, well, pretty much everything to global managed service providers. Now, a CIO I worked with had a neat outlook on the world of outsourcing, and that was, what makes us think we can deliver, for example, a service desk service to our end users better than an organisation whose business is delivering IT service desks. Now, the purpose of this video is not me to say simply every service desk should be outsourced. As I've said in the past, and I will say again, horses for courses. And for some services, it's entirely feasible, whatever your requirements are, that you may be able to do certain things better in-house than outsourcing. But hopefully that quote of sorts resonates with you as it did with me. So outsourcing is very much a part of life and has been for many years, but I guarantee if you were a fly on the wall of any IT department or IT provider, it wouldn't take long to hear gripes and grumbles about those on the other side of the proverbial fence, be that the supplier side or the customer side. What are they doing? They don't understand the challenges we face. They don't understand the way we work. And that can be true of either side. But why is that? If we take a step back, both sides of the fence want to achieve the same thing. The IT provider wants to provide those services for a profit, let's not beat around the bush, and the customer wants to receive those services to allow it to do what it needs to do, because it can't or doesn't want to do those things itself. I've been fortunate enough to work on both sides of the fence, and if you have too, you'll know it can be an eye-opening experience whichever direction it is that you've gone in. As a customer, I can look back on my experiences and certainly identify things, if in the same position again, I would do differently. And certain things I can confidently say, you know what, that worked well, both for me and my partner, and I'd certainly do it again. So today I want to share some of my helpful hints, top tips, positive pointers to overcoming outsourcing obstacles. What a mouthful. Obvious alert. I know this sounds obvious, but as a customer, you absolutely have an obligation to fully understand your own requirements and needs before talking to, well, any supplier. And those needs need to be threefold. One, what utility are you after, what the service needs to deliver, or what outcome it is that you're looking for. Two, the warranty your outcome needs, how available, continual, secure, how much capacity the service needs. We've talked about these things before. And thirdly, how does the service plug into the way IT services are already delivered to your user base? How will this integrate? What amendments to maybe other services need to happen to plug this in? And are those services in-house or outsourced already? For example, you're onboarding a new service and previously you've taken the decision to outsource your service desk. Calls about this new service need to be passed from your desk provider to your new service provider. Well, how is that going to happen? How is that going to be governed and measured? What is the role of the retained organisation, i.e. the customer, in making sure that happens successfully? From experience, defining requirements for utility, fairly straightforward. Warranty can be trickier, but check out my extra value reel video for advice on that. But it's those integration considerations that easily get overlooked, put on the back burner, or obliviously get ignored, only to cause very real operational issues once the new service has gone live. Sometimes there's a false expectation or assumption that, well, it'll be all right on the night, or worse, that it is simply the service provider's responsibility to make sure all this works as it should. Not true, and, well, how could it be? The term SIOAOA, or Service Integration and Management, exists for a reason, and whoever holds that responsibility within your organisation, they should be clear on how the overall operating model and ecosystem hangs together. In fact, if it's not clear who or which function, which committee holds that responsibility in your company or business, make clarifying that an absolute priority. My advice, and something I've done myself in the past, is to map out how you anticipate the service to operate and function from a support perspective once live, covering the main day-to-day processes we all use: incident, problem, request change, asset config, event. You launch a brand new online portal to sell widgets to your customers based on a SaaS product, and first call arrives from a user saying it's not working. Where does that call arrive into? How does it get to where it needs to go? How does your user get provided with updates and so on? Now, it's very, very easy when doing this to come up with a utopian perfect world scenario, but perfect does have a downside in that it's usually expensive, and you need to, of course, bear your budget in mind. If your service desk provider is using one ticketing system, which is different to the SaaS provider, then you need to think about how those transactions are going to happen, and what are your providers and partners able and willing to do to make that happen. Those options, especially when talking about toolset integration, can be complex, timely, and costly to implement. Whilst that might be your preferred option, it makes sense to think when defining your requirements for those things, what your alternatives are. Which things pragmatically can be compromised on so long as they don't materially upset the balance and operating model of your services. And again, this comes down to having a good handle on what's important to your customers and how your IT services are currently delivered. Now, I told you I'd use it again. I'm quickly finding myself using this phrase a lot, but it's definitely applicable here. Horses for courses. Would you, for example, take a first date to a greasy spoon cafe or a fast food restaurant? I'm guessing many of you may not. In fact, let me know in the comments if you've ever been on a first date to the Golden Arches. In all seriousness, no you wouldn't, because you know that service provider, whilst there's nothing wrong with its service per se, those services right now, for that situation, for that purpose, don't meet your needs. And again, IT services and the providers of those services are no different. Each provider has their own way of delivering services, their own ways of operating, strengths, weaknesses, variances based on a whole range of factors. I'm not saying some suppliers are inherently good or bad, of course not, but there are some better suited to your needs than others, based on whatever those needs are. A lot rests on, of course, the culture of your business and how you do business, but also the type of service that you're in the market for. I dealt with a supplier once who were very transactional. We paid their invoice every month, they delivered the service as agreed, not better, not worse, but as agreed. Now, at the time, the company I worked with decided to run a very focused program of work on service improvement and collaboration. And to be as inclusive as possible, we determined it was a good idea to include all of our partners. However, this particular partner showed little, if any, interest in engaging. Our big managed service provider did, our big app support and development partner did, but this supplier, nothing. After banging my head on the brick wall for a few days, I realised, well, why would they want to get involved in such an initiative? What's in it for them? And actually, what's in it for me? They deliver a commodity service to me for a decent price to agreed performance levels. They've developed over many years standard ways of working, efficiencies that allow them to deliver that service to that quality for that price. Me asking them to get on board and do things maybe a little differently in the spirit of service improvement, why? If anything, that could disrupt or alter how that service is delivered to me. So as part of selecting a partner or supplier to work with, you as the customer have to have a clear view on the type of relationship you require. Some agreements you set out to form will be more strategic in nature, others will be more transaction based. Some suppliers might be niche and bespoke, and how they operate may be radically different to those of the big managed service providers. Treating all suppliers the same is not treating them or yourself fairly. Therefore, my advice, before procuring any IT service from any vendor, don't just consider the service requirements, but also the type of relationship both parties will need to have and whether there is a cultural fit. That is going to take research, both in terms of customer testimonials, but also internal research to gain clarity on what your needs are in this space specifically. Now, picture the scene. You stop by a fast food restaurant for a happy burger, you've ordered your food, and in the background you can see the team cooking your meal. Now, have you ever shouted behind the counter to tell them to prepare it differently, use different ingredients, utilise a different process for getting that burger into your mouth? No, of course you haven't. You go into that restaurant for a specific outcome, in this case a burger. Based on the price point and the expectations laid out by that franchise, a fast food burger, not gourmet, fine dining, wrapped in a paper, not placed on fine china, will be in your hand in 5 minutes and not in an hour. And you expect that because that is the level of service expected from that provider. If you wanted those other things, you wouldn't be in that restaurant. Yet with IT services, there's often the expectation that a customer can outsource their services, but simply ask the provider to deliver the services as perhaps they have done themselves or a previous provider has done up to that point. Again, back to our definition of service, to achieve an outcome without the ownership of cost and risk. Therefore, unless you have a very specific requirement that is defined, agreed and baked into your service agreement, as a customer, focus on the outcome you are to achieve and not how the service provider does that. You know, that phrase, it's like having a dog and barking yourself, it is true here. If you've decided to outsource, one of the reasons is because you and your business does not want to or cannot deliver that service themselves and does not want the cost and risk of ownership. That can feel uncomfortable and provide a feeling of not having the necessary control you feel you need over how your services are delivered to your users. Now, I worked for a business that had outsourced a number of its IT process stuff to a third party, and the change manager we had aligned to our account was absolutely phenomenal. They constantly went over and above, delivered real value to me and my team, and I was horrified when I heard that they were being moved onto another customer account. Now, I fought tooth and nail to keep that individual on the account, but was politely reminded by my boss that, well, by and large, that's a waste of my time and effort. The partner we worked with was signed up to deliver an outcome with well-defined parameters, which was not based around a certain individual. Who it was in that partner's organisation that delivered that to me was their issue to deal with, and all I should be concerned with was that I got the outcome I paid for. And again, that's a definition of a service, right? It's a service. And looking back, they were right. On a day-to-day basis, it is difficult, especially when working relationships are so tight, to lose sight of these sorts of facts. And it can be difficult not to step over those lines of demarcation. But as a customer, focusing on how a provider delivers the service to you over the outcome can be detrimental to all parties, and most importantly, you. If you're going to be focused on outcomes, then of course you're going to want to make sure those outcomes are measurable and that the agreement you sign up to is based around those measures. Again, I've said make sure you're measuring what matters. And that's especially true when it comes to, of course, signing up to a service agreement. When defining requirements, try to define which measures are the most important to you when it comes to reflecting what and how the service delivers what it's supposed to. But don't go overboard. I've seen agreements where there are literally hundreds of metrics, targets and KPIs, and all this results in is a ridiculous amount of effort and subsequently debate about these measures, and it literally forces the provider, or can force the provider, to operate differently in order to meet or caveat those measures, which on reflection goes against why you've selected that partner in the first place. Again, if I walk into McDonald's and force them to provide me a product and service like a competitor, then I have to question, why am I in McDonald's in the first place? So focus on those measures which reflect the outcome you want to achieve most, and not those that force the supplier really out of their comfort zone in detriment to those reasons you selected them in the first place. I'd also recommend, before you agree the measures by which you want to manage your supplier to, you think about these as a collective and review whether those collective measures work in conjunction with one another and drive the right behaviours you require. One example where I've fallen foul was insisting my service desk provider adhere to a very, very challenging first-time fix target and also an average call duration target. What transpired in reality was this. We knew from our end users that being able to hang up the phone to the service desk with their issue fixed was a really important factor to them. Therefore, this was established as one of those key measures to drive the right behaviour. However, because of the penalties associated with that measure, the provider was driven to meet that target over and above all of the others that they had. What that resulted in was users being kept on the phone for an extraordinary amount of time, whilst the analyst literally tried everything and anything to resolve the incident. This led to the provider willingly breaching their call duration target because the penalties associated to that was less severe than breaching the first time fix target. And by being very stringent on how I would measure and therefore pay my supplier, this led to a no-win situation. The supplier was delivering a subpar service compared to their usual standard because of the measures I insisted on. That meant the supplier was being financially penalised, my users were receiving a poorer service, And the relationship between the two parties was often fraught when, at the outset, everyone's intentions are good. And that brings me neatly on to the next point. Now, hopefully, as that last example proved, working with third-party suppliers and partners is not some sort of competition akin to big game hunting. Ultimately, two partners are agreeing to work together in order to deliver an outcome for the benefit of a group of users. This thing, the latest revision talks about value being co-created and recognises that partners and suppliers are a key dimension in order to deliver value. Yet, so often, when things get really bad, the relationship between two parties becomes more about the competitive one-upmanship on both sides than it does the outcome. As important as it is that the customer feels like they're getting a good service, value for money, etc., it's equally important that the supplier and their employees feel engaged, enthused, and committed to providing that service to your user base. They are, of course, part of your IT ecosystem and are representative of your IT service. Therefore, it does take concerted effort from both parties on both sides of the fence to foster and maintain a relationship that allows that to be a positive outcome for your users. One idea I've insisted on when I've outsourced services is including supplier teams as part of key IT communications about the direction of the IT services and strategy where appropriate. I've also made sure where we survey members of the IT team to gauge their engagement, their ideas, this also includes key members of the supplier teams. A disengaged supplier is or can be as detrimental to your service as a disengaged member of your own team. So let's make sure we give them some love. Oh, and to be clear, this video has not been sponsored by McDonald's. My waistline, different story. Thanks for stopping by. I've been Gareth at SIOAAOA. See you next time.